It's nice to see you all here. I'm Diana Lawson. I am the Dean of the Seidman College of Business, and this is our third Secchia breakfast for the winter semester, which is already over. The students are gone for the most part, and they'll start coming back on Monday for summer school. When we were thinking about whether or not we should have a third breakfast, because we'd done two breakfasts this semester in AI, and our intent was to do a third one, we said, we're not sure that's going to work. And then 2 weeks ago, we said, you know what? We need to do something on trade. With everything that's going on in the world and international trade, we thought there might be some people who would be interested. So we're really glad to see you all and have you all here. Our moderator today is Sonia Johnson. Sonia Johnson is the executive director of the Van Andel Global Trade Center, which is located here in Seidman, so it's part of the Seidman College of Business. And they work closely with businesses, mostly on the west side of the state, but across the state, in helping them to internationalize what they do, and more recently, to help them troubleshoot all of the issues that they have been having in the last several weeks or months. So I am going to turn this over to Sonia. She will introduce our panelists who also are in the middle of trade, and we will have conversations for about 35 to 40 minutes and then give you some time to ask questions and wrap it up by 9 o'clock. It's nice to have you all here. Thanks.
Thanks, Diana, and thanks for joining us, no less, on a Friday morning. So good to see everyone. What a fun topic, right? No one's had a headache dealing with tariffs in the last 3 months, right? So it's my privilege today to bring all of our panelists today. They are truly sharing valuable time with us today. I can't thank them enough. This all came up very last minute. I think many of them were on spring break with their families, if I recall correctly. So I definitely owe them and am indebted to them for that. So let me start to my far left. Adam Madigan, he is the COO of Bissell Home Care, Inc. He's been there a number of years. He is a treasure to the community. He certainly wants to share his personal experiences with us as best we can. We all kind of shared when we talked earlier this week. We are not economists. We'll leave that to Paul Isley. I know he's here today. We are not really the future predictors, and this definitely is a geopolitical topic, but we're approaching today's event from a business argument. How are we actually dealing with it and updating it? So again, thank you, Adam, for your time. And then next to Adam is Angela Gamatsky, and she's with Hogeman LLC, and she's based out of she's a partner with them in their compliance division out of the east side of Detroit, so she did have a long commute. Hopefully she came in last night. And she'll share her experiences working with a variety of industries. And then right next to me here is Brian Gill, and he's with Tessa Tape North America, and he's their in-house legal counsel. So he'll have a very unique perspective to lend today's conversation. So just kind of set a few game rules here, because we talked earlier. I wanted to make sure that they felt comfortable. We are kind of here expressing our experience in this topic from a personal perspective. So they're not representing their name brands necessarily. And I told them they have the liberty, as coming on as panelists today, to abstain from any questions that may be thrown at them. So we've got some interesting ones, so we'll go ahead and get started with a few, but we will leave time for you guys to answer some questions as well. Sound good? Okay, so to start out, can you give a little bit more of a background, Adam, starting with you, of kind of what your organization is and your footprint for anybody that's not familiar with Bissell?
Sure. Bissell is a Grand Rapids-based company, founded in 1876 here in Grand Rapids. It's headquartered up in Walker. We are a floor care company, so I tell my wife every day when I leave the house that I'm going to sell vacuum cleaners. We are a market leader here in the U.S. and have a fairly large global footprint from a sales perspective. And most of our production comes out of Asia at this point, both Southeast Asia and China. We're about $2 billion in revenue and have been around for a while, still family-run, privately held.
Thank you.
I'm a partner at Honigman. We're one of the larger law firms in Michigan. We have 7 offices spread across the Midwest, as well as an office in Israel and an office in DC. My practice focuses on international trade. I've been in the compliance space more generally for about 15 years, doing international trade for about the last 7, although the last 3 months have really felt like another 2 years in them.
Yeah. Thanks, Angela. Right?
Good morning. So I'm the in-house counsel for Tesa Tape. It's one of the leading adhesive companies in the world. Our German parent company is located near Hamburg. The company has over 100 years of experience. And because we're exclusively B2B in the US, you probably haven't heard of us, but if you tear open an Amazon delivery, that might be our tear tape, or there probably is some adhesive that we produce in the vehicle you drive. We're in a variety of sectors, including home appliance. So if you get, for example, an LG washer dryer delivered and remove the tape used to protect the doors in transit, that's probably us.
Great. So kind of know who our panelists are and kind of their perspective. So I'm kind of putting a lot of weight on Angela's shoulder to represent a lot of the small, medium-sized firms that she's working with right now. So to kick us off today, tell us, what's changed from the 2018 tariffs to today, and can you give us your perspective on what that looks like and what's different between those 2 additional tariffs?
Yeah, so for Bissell, if folks remember when in Trump's first administration, there were tariffs on specifically China around about $500 billion of goods, and that happened early in 2018 and evolved kind of through 18 into 19. It was very targeted. It was at a 25% level, but floor care was one of those tariffs. So this is something that we've been dealing with for a number of years. Obviously, we had tariffs and we had COVID. Now we have tariffs again. The world is very, very volatile, as you all know. So in 2018, we were able to get a bit of a jump start on this and kind of look at the way that we wanted to evolve our supply chain. But I would say the big difference versus now is it was clearly a focused effort against China, and the playing board or the playing field was a bit clearer. So if you were in China, getting out of China was the goal. The safe zone was the area outside of China, and that was kind of how you could make your decisions and plan your future. I would say today, the challenge of the environment is the playing board is a little less clear. Where is the safe zone? The U.S. is certainly one that comes with challenges that we can talk about. But the difference today, I would say, is it's less clear on where you want to land. And I think that's the real challenge of the environment is the uncertainty of what the dynamic's going to be and the choices that you can make about it. If you remember 2018, as the tariffs played out, exceptions became a big part of the process. So tariffs were placed, and then seemingly 50% of the tariffs people got excluded from, which, in my view and in our company's view was probably the worst possible outcome. If there's going to be tariffs, have tariffs, make the playing field clear. If there's not, then let's not have them. But having exceptions certainly creates further challenges of, you end up punishing people who are doing what you unintentionally punishing people who are doing what you want them to do. So I would say the 2 big differences are the targeted nature in 2018, and then the exception process does not appear to be a part of this time. We'll see how that plays out over the next few months, but those are certainly the differences that I think we're feeling and seeing.
Angela, how about you? Can you add any?
So I'll just echo that. In 2018, there were court cases, there were exception letters, there were exclusion applications. It was a process where you could say, here's all the reasons that this doesn't apply. And I'm having vague memories at this point of, helping write part of those letters. And this time around, it's so much more black and white. Number one, there's no exception, there's no exclusion, there's no off-ramp, there's no way to really facilitate getting a client out of this. So now it's more just you have to find a way to live with this and grief counseling instead of finding a customized solution.
Yeah.
And then the other challenge is how much broader this is, because in 2018 and 2019 it was, it was China and it was steel, but there were all these adjustments that were being made to recognize what U.S. capacity was versus a foreign capacity, and so that whole process has changed. And I think the final piece that's changed is just the speed at which these programs have come into place, that they're not announced with 30 days notice or 60 days notice. This is announced today, happening tomorrow.
Great point. Thank you. Anything that you want to add that they didn't, Brian, or we can move on to the next question I've got?
Maybe at a high level, I think the
Okay.
geopolitical stakes are higher this time, because I would say that compared to Trump 1.0, tariffs felt more like an economic issue, whereas now we can layer over the war in Ukraine, geopolitics, and there seems to be higher tension on a bilateral and international level.
Yeah, for sure. So let's just talk about the rate of speed of these coming at us like a ocean wave after wave. So what has your team done to keep up with this environment of the 2025 tariffs? What are you doing about it? Adam, you want to start us out on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, I think we all understood what, was it April 2nd could bring. I don't think we understood the scale of what it could bring. When we talked about reciprocal tariffs, all of our analysis on countries like Vietnam, where that the reciprocal tariff would be in the neighborhood of 8 to 10%. If folks are familiar, Vietnam was announced at a 46% tariff. And so the scale of it was probably the most surprising piece. We expected certainly a change, and so we had been forecasting that. I think the scale is what surprised us. And then, yes, the pace at which it got implemented. For us, it's been all hands on deck. I mean, this is an all-consuming topic. It has overtaken the organization. We as an executive team are meeting 3 times a week to discuss action plans and make decisions. And so there is not long-range planning. It is very much, bailing water out of the ship, and then hoping to secure the whole as we get the water out. But it is an all-consuming topic, and I think you just have to treat it that way. It is a crisis, and that is the mode that our organization has gone into.
Brian, do you want to add to that? You have a global footprint as well, so.
It's very similar for us. We have a task force on tariffs, which meets now 3 times a week. And I would say, in addition to trying to understand the economic calculus and how that impacts us, so for example, we have factories around the world. We have in China and Vietnam, of course in the EU where we're headquartered, and our US and North American manufacturing is up in Sparta. So we have the capacity to shift production around. That said, it's not that simple, because you might think tape is tape. It's very different. There are a lot of different tapes, and we can't necessarily port over overnight, for example, capacity from China to Vietnam, because it might be different technology, or move from China back here. So we're trying to think long term. In the short term, we're trying to pacify our customers, maintain the accounts. In the long term, we're very much contingency planning. And contingency planning against a rapidly evolving environment. So I completely agree. It's an all-consuming process.
Yeah. So how are you interacting with your customers and your suppliers based on that? How are you kind of interacting with them now? Is it reactive, or are you trying to be proactive? What's kind of your approach with your customers and your supplier base?
So again, there are different types of tapes. There are tapes where the customers are less price sensitive. And I think there we have a little bit more freedom. We probably face the same equation that every company does. How much are we going to absorb, and how much are we going to push on to our customer? And what does our market share look like when all is said and done? So that's very much an issue. And we're negotiating as well with our suppliers. So we do a lot of importing, and then we process and we sell for the US market. We export to Canada and Mexico. And so there are both sides of it, trying to hold down the price increases from our suppliers and trying to pass on some reasonable amount to our customers while protecting our margins.
Have they been open to like looking at renegotiating contracts, or is that a topic that, you know, is pretty fluid for you right now?
Some are.
Okay.
Some are. And Angela might want to jump in as well, if that's okay, on the contract side. You know, I can say that we're very carefully looking at our clauses. Force majeure is a hot topic. Pricing adjustments, there are clauses in contracts that are pricing adjustment. Questions come up all the time. Are tariffs a force majeure, for example? Or, yeah, we've locked ourselves into a 3-year contract. What flexibility do we have to increase our prices? Are tariffs a price increase, or can they be itemized separately, called out as a surcharge on an invoice? So those are hot topics for us, maybe for the others as well.
So Angela, how are you working with your clients on, are you reevaluating contracts with them, or?
You know, absolutely. Everyone is looking at what they have. One of the big challenges for a lot of companies is they say, well, we never really had a contract. We just signed purchase orders back and forth.
Okay.
Oh, well, that if it's in writing, it's a contract. And so that leaves you almost in a worse position because now you don't have anything in writing that you've agreed to. So you're trying to figure out, well, how do we say what's reasonable? And at least under Michigan law, tariffs don't count as force majeure. That's just a change in economic conditions, not a change in legal conditions, which makes us much more challenging than 5 years ago with COVID, when we were all shut down because of a public health emergency. That was if that, as one of my partners said, if that's not force majeure, what is?
Yeah.
But tariffs are just really a change in economic circumstances. And as Brian said, it becomes a question of, well, is this my profit margin or your profit margin that's being eaten up?
So suppliers, are they worried about losing you as a customer? How is that relationship evolving? Can you talk a little bit about that? Brian or Adam?
Sure. I mean, if you think about our supply chain, the way our supply chain works is we have partners, mostly third party in Asia, that are producing our goods. You know, we are bringing them into the U.S., paying a tariff on them. We are selling them primarily to retailers, so you can think Walmart, Amazon, Target, and they are selling them to consumers. So agree 100% with someone in that chain is going to eat profit margin, or it's going to come out of the consumer's pocket, and the math is just how do you structure it to maximize the value of the supply chain and pick the right places to take the tariff cost from. You know, and we have that conversation pretty transparently with our partners. We believe in long-term partnership. We do not want to be transactional in this environment. We want to make sure we have a long view and that we're having conversations that are win-win. I mean, our partners know that their volume is contingent upon consumers buying their products. They know that we can't just pass all of the costs on and expect to continue to sell the same units. But we also know that everyone needs to have a healthy P&L and a healthy balance sheet through this. And so our principle is just high transparency. The day tariffs were announced, I was on a conference call at 11 o'clock at night with our partners in Asia explaining the situation and how we were thinking about it and the actions we were going to take. And we've continued to have that conversation, regularly and bring them along on the journey. And it is a journey. And, there are no clear answers. There are conversations, and I think we've just tried to be open and transparent about how we're thinking about it. Certainly listening to their feedback, but then making decisions and taking actions. And many partners are willing to engage in that, and some aren't. And if they aren't, then it's probably not a partnership, and we need to reevaluate where we're going to go.
Thank you. Anything to add to that, Brian? I think that was really good coverage.
Yeah, I can only echo those comments. Times like this really put resilience to the test. You find out how strong is your relationship. This is, of course, what companies want to build, both on the purchasing and on the sales side. And you hope to have built up enough political capital that at a moment like this you can ride it out. I'll add one thought. I'm a fan, actually, of crises, and I know that probably sounds strange, but I think that they are opportunities. They can bring out the creative side in us. And there are opportunities, if you are clever in the negotiations and the bargaining, to bring value in that is not only price-based. Tariffs, I think, has us focused right now on pricing. But a business relationship doesn't always come down only to that. So there are ways, if for example, one of your customers has to absorb a higher cost, maybe there's something that you can offer by way of better service or promising first dibs on a new market launch, something like that. So my point is there are a lot of tools that we have to play with. Pricing is not the only one.
Great, and so that kind of dovetails in my next question. How are the tariff environment or this U.S. Changing policy on tariffs impacting the culture of your company and how you interact with your customers? Is it changing that relationship? And can you talk a little bit to that, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly adds urgency and pressure to the discussion. And I've got a couple of coworkers in the audience today. I'd love to hear their perspective on this question. I'll give you mine. I think fear is the natural reaction to it, right? You read the headlines and it puts an enormous amount of pressure on companies. I'm sure you're all under an enormous amount of pressure. And, we are fortunate that we have access to capital that allows us to do some of these things. I think the challenge in this environment is going to be companies that are going to get squeezed. And I really fear and worry for those companies. I think because that is what people are reading, the natural reaction is fear. And we talk a lot about controlling what we can control, and just focusing on what can we do and what is the span of control and the levers that we have that allow us to navigate this environment. And doing that transparently and over communicating it and trying to get people beyond the fear. I talk a lot about it's okay to worry, do it for 15 minutes, and then we need to move on and get on with the actions. And so trying to contain that, I think, becomes a lot of the conversations. And for us, it's really about communication and trying to be transparent on the action plans and the impact it's going to have. I mean, it brings travel brands, it brings OpEx cuts, it brings lots of different operating models to the organization. People are very willing to do that if they understand why and what we're trying to do long term. And I think it's getting everyone in the same boat and headed in the same direction and controlling what we can control. That's what we talk a lot about.
Great, thanks. Brian, anything to add?
Well, for a company that has factories around the world, it can put stress and nervousness on employees. So I haven't talked to colleagues in China, for example, but I can imagine some of them might be worried now. Are we going to shut down production there or at least transfer some of the production from China to Vietnam or China to the US? And probably the answer is we don't yet know because we don't know what the mathematical equation is. We almost need the tariffs to settle into some new equilibrium in order to know what our financial incentive is. But that's top of mind, even if people are not voicing the concern out loud. And that's probably something for executives and managers to be aware of.
Yeah. So let's circle back to supply chain, because obviously I think the tariff situation impacts the supply chain the most. To your earlier point, Angela, on COVID, we learned a lot through supply chain of what works and doesn't work with COVID. So what, if anything, are you guys seeing your customers apply to this complex supply chain and not knowing what the true cost will be in relation to the tariffs? Angela, you want to start us out?
Sure, Sonia, and that's a great question because I think one of the key challenges that many companies are dealing with right now, when a supplier comes to you and says, tariffs are increasing our cost, and so we need to go up X%. And some suppliers really rush to get out that message. A lot of the companies that I'm working with are looking at that and saying, we want to peel into that. We want to understand, where are your goods coming from? You're not just selling us a chunk of wood. You're selling us something a little complex. So tell us and walk us through your math to say what portions of these goods are impacted by what tariffs. There's all these different lists now, and so that makes it a more challenging conversation for in navigating that, to say, tell us a little bit more about your supply chain, because suppliers love talking about, where they're just reselling goods and marking up. So it's a challenge. At the end of the day, it's a challenging conversation to say, okay, if we have to pay an increased price, we want to see some transparency on that to understand how you're calculating that price, and we want to understand what you're doing to try and minimize that price.
So has anybody looked at rerouting cargo or moving your supply chain differently, slowing it down, tapping the brakes a little bit, maybe hitting that gas pedal over the next 90 days? What are you guys doing to kind of manage what's going on? Adam?
Yeah, and I think 90 days, 90 days is about as far as you can look right now. So I think it's what is the next 90 days going to bring, and how are we going to maximize, cash flow for the next 90 days. And when we talk to suppliers and when we talk to retailers, it really is, this is our plan for the next 90 days. Here's what we would ask for you to do in this period. And then as we get more information, we'll reassess. The minute China tariffs were announced, we shut down cargo from China. If you look at the number of inbound ships coming from China, it's a followable statistic. The last few ships are docking on the West Coast that are tariff-free, and then there's not a lot of ships behind it. At 145%, it just doesn't make sense for us to import goods from China. And so that will be our stance until things change. We're certainly looking at, okay, what do we think the landscape is going to look like 90 days from now, and where do we need to move production in order to give ourselves a viable supply chain going forward. But yeah, there are certainly decisions. I think in these times you have to go to what is going to maximize the cash flow of your business, and 145% tariff in our situation is not a cash flow positive experience. And so, that's what we did. And that's what we'll continue to do. And 90 days from now, we'll reassess.
Brian, how about you guys? Maybe from a North American perspective, what have you done, logistically and with your inventory from a North America footprint?
So on the inventory side, like many companies, we really enhanced our purchasing. And not only due to tariffs, you might remember in January there was the threat of the International Longshoremen Association strike. And so we did a big buy before that. And then we had another big buy before Liberation Day, so that we could have an inventory of products at a lower price and sort of delay the impact of passing the costs on to our customers. In terms of routing, the US, Canada, and Mexico have a free trade agreement, and that means that there can be double tariffs. So, for example, we would import a lot of goods into the US, and then they might be re-exported to Mexico, where we have a lot of assembly. And we could take the double tariff hit if that hit us in certain cases, because it wasn't too bad. It might have been cheaper to route through the US and take the double tariff hit. That's no longer the case. So whatever comes into the US now destined for Mexico, we're trying to transport in bond. But that in turn creates a lot of additional requirements. So we can only move it into a bonded warehouse. The goods have to be segregated from the goods that are not in bond. And we've had a very good, nimble supply chain team that's been able to react very quickly to these changes.
So, Angela, can you talk a little bit? Are you exploring some opportunities to that vein of looking at a customs bonded facility versus a foreign trade zone? What are you talking through with your customer? Because I know that the trade centers phones have been ringing off the hook and exploring that very conversation. In fact, yesterday I was just out in Holland with customs at a manufacturer out there having this very conversation. But can you talk about some of your clients you're working with on that very decision?
Sure. And so for those in the room who don't know, so a customs bonded warehouse, or an FTZ, your goods don't actually enter the US for duties purposes. So it saves you today from paying the duties. The challenge with that is your goods enter under foreign status, which under the way that some of these tariff rules have been written, they're locked in at 145% the day they enter foreign status. So your kicking the can in terms of paying the duties on those goods if they need to come into the US. But if your supply chain and your network is going to route them into Mexico or route them into Canada, it is a really good option because then you're not incurring that charge. So the question always becomes, where are the goods ultimately going to end up? Because maybe you're going to spend a bunch of time and you're just kicking the can on when you're paying it, you're not avoiding paying it at all.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest misconception. You'll eventually, if it stays in the commerce of the United States, you eventually will pay that. So, and then the conversation is, these tariff rates are all over the board. I heard a rumor 200% for China. So, I mean, it goes up, it just is very uncertain time. So to make a long-term decision on that, which it is a little more difficult to get the foreign trade zone because there's a federal process to follow with that. So it is a time commitment administratively while you're trying to keep all the other balls up in the air with the changing tariff scenario. So it definitely is a lot going on in there. Can you talk about some of the strategies in your businesses? And again, we said, I think the long-term approach versus the short-term approach. So what are you looking at with managing the tariffs? Angela, are you having conversations with customers and looking at the classification of their goods? You're talking tariff engineering. Because those tariff rules apply to those harmonized codes. So if they don't have the right harmonized code, they're going to apply the wrong rule. What are you doing with your clients and looking at that as far as opportunities to make sure that they have their foundation set properly?
I mean, it's the foundational question. You can't start really coming up with a strategy until you know your product's tariff codes. And maybe your company had a ruling put in place, but maybe you've been operating just off what someone, this is what we've always done. So that's challenge number one. Some of the bigger, I want to take one step back. U.S. Customs rules are civil rules. There are also criminal sides to U.S. Customs. So companies or people that intentionally misclassify goods or intentionally obscure the country of origin of goods can face criminal penalties, which the Department of Justice has committed their full enforcement to. Companies that misclassify goods and are identified by U.S. Customs can pay treble damages, so 3 times the value of tariffs that should have been paid. And under these executive orders, Customs is directed to give zero leniency or negotiate with companies on those penalties as they have always historically done. So from that foundation, it becomes really critical to have the right people in the room having these conversations to make sure you have your engineering team looking at something, you have your logistics team, you have your legal counsel, you have people who are making informed decisions, not just quick decisions to find quick solutions that may have some really expensive ramifications.
Great. Anything to add to that, Brian? No? Good. Okay. So I think that's the biggest thing, and to have conversations. We've been interesting calls at the Trade Center, and one was like, okay, our goods come in via Mexico from our supplier in Asia, so we're good, right? Because it's Mexico. It's originated out of Mexico. And it's like, well, okay, let me give you a scenario. I have a U.S. passport. I'm a U.S. citizen. If I have a layover in Amsterdam on my way over to Italy, my citizenship doesn't change. I don't convert over to Dutch. So you need to apply that for your goods. Just because it has a layover in another country does not mean that the origin of China changed to Mexico or Canada or France or wherever it's coming in from. So keep that in perspective, as much as I might like to be a Dutch citizen these days during tulip time starting today. But yeah, so just keep that in mind that it doesn't change the origination of that good, of that where it was made. And so that's really critical to take a look at that. So what has been the most outlandish thing that you've heard, either in the business community at large or within your own organization, about these tariff policies or the rule in place? Adam, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, the most outlandish thing or most outlandish conversation I had was last week with someone who just believed it was all going to go away. And I think if that's your mindset, I think, I'll say it frankly, I think you're wrong. I think we've learned this over a number of years, and particularly the China tariffs, I don't expect to go away. They may go down. I hope they go down. I don't think they will go back to zero in any short-term time horizon. And so I think if people aren't evaluating the options to build their business sustainable around a tariff structure coming out of particularly China, I think that's a outlandish kind of premise. And we've learned this a couple of times. I mean, we learned it in Trump 1.0, we learned it in COVID. We are learning it again, that diversified and sustainable supply chains are probably necessary to operating in the future. It may be a very painful way to learn it, but I don't think that will change whether it's tariffs or something else. Building a sustainable supply chain that is not dependent upon one country, I think has to be your mantra going forward. The world is too volatile and changing too much to be singularly threaded from a sustainable business model at this point.
Brian, do you want to add to that? Have you heard anything interesting?
I have a very similar observation. I would say that the do-nothing option is probably the worst one. In other words, I would not place all bets on the dust settling in a way where the world looks like it did in, say, October of 2024. Not for all countries. I'm sure also that it will not look exactly the same way for China that it did before. So as difficult as it is, as vexing as it can be to try to contingency plan for all the different scenarios, I think the companies that come out well when the dust does settle are the ones that will make the effort. And maybe to put an additional spin on it, remember there's an expression that it's not necessary to outrun the bear, it's only necessary to outrun the slowest person. So your challenge in a way is manage the chaos better than the competition does.
Very well said.
Well said, yes.
Angela, I'm sure you're working with a variety of industries. What's the most outlandish thing that you've heard?
So I'm kind of torn between two. So one was someone who came to me, we were discussing the tariff classification of their product, and they gave me this answer. I said, well, that's from ChatGPT. I can tell. And it's giving you an illegal reason. Like, you don't just pick the number that gets you to the lower tariff. Like, you pick the number that's not why we, And then finally their customs broker joined the chat and said, yeah, your lawyer's right. So that was helpful. And my other one was someone who called me who said, I make this and I do this and this is, so what's my impact? And it's like, okay, give me a couple days. And she's like, but I need the answer now. It's a complex topic, and 2 points of data or 3 points of data isn't enough information. And so I think as companies start to unpack this and recognize that your solution to tariffs is like a Rubik's Cube. And as soon as you solve one side, now you have problems on every other side. So getting all of those pieces to align is not a 2-second answer.
Very well said. So now I'm going to put you in the personal spot. So in your personal opinions, where do you think things will be? Let's say, I'm going to push it, Adam, beyond 90 days. Let's like 6 months from now. What do you think? Not holding you to it, but.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yes, this is completely Adam Madigan's opinion. I think you will see a settling of tariffs in China. I expect they will still be 50% or something along those lines. I think the big question mark is Southeast Asia, and does it look the same for every country, or are there winners and losers in Southeast Asia? And my outlook is that there will be winners and losers in Southeast Asia. And so as you're evaluating your options, I do not expect every country of Southeast Asia to have a tariff on it. The key is picking which one is not going to. And I will certainly, over coffee afterwards, share my opinion on what that is. And so I think that will be what it looks like in Southeast Asia. I would expect the seas to calm in more of the traditional allied world. There are probably targeted industries where tariffs will still exist. I think the auto industry, I'm sure many of you are involved, is one that I can't forecast. I'm not totally sure what the end game is. So that's one I think that there will continue to be a lot of volatility in. But I expect we will figure it out with Japan and with Western Europe and with Canada. There may still be targeted and national security tariffs that we continue to keep in place, but I think the seas will settle there.
Angela, what's your prediction?
So 6 months from now, I think we will have hopefully reached a place of stable chaos, but I don't think costs are going to come down. And I think it's going to become a much more challenging environment where we're going to start seeing smaller businesses fail. If there's a period where we get empty shelves, you might see some of that starting to soften, because those visuals on CNN of the empty Walmarts are going to have a really big impact.
Brian, how about you?
Well, taking the president at his word, I think that the game or the end game would be something like this, that 10% tariff would be, let's say, the new normal. There will be cases where it's lower, maybe even zero on a reciprocal basis, but there will be sectors, there will be countries that are subject to a higher than 10% tariff. I think the tariff was designed to do a few things. Well, raise revenue for the government. These are the premises. I'm not saying that they will prove to be correct. Incentivize reshoring of jobs, and also to be used as a carrot to extract concessions. For example, the EU could get tariff relief if it buys $200 billion in liquefied natural gas, something like that. I think that we will find that there is some financial incentive to reshore jobs. I think that in some sectors, companies will start the planning to move production back to the US. I don't think it's realistic to say that will happen across the board. So for example, electronics, I just don't know. And absent a 200% tariff, I don't know how it's economically viable to produce all of that in the US. So I think that we'll probably find that some element of what the tariffs were intended to do is in process, but I don't think that all the goals necessarily will be achieved, and that's me in my personal capacity as well.
Yes. Well, thanks for sharing those. So that's my list of questions. So I think we have a few minutes to open it up for questions from the audience. Way in the back, Troy.
So I have a question. So Troy Curley, Director of the Career Center in Grand Valley. Has the tariffs had an impact on hiring?
I mean, the tariffs have impacted every element of the business. I mean, capital expense, hiring, operating expense. Yeah, I think it was said earlier in the panel, the speed at which these move and the uncertainty, and as any 101 class I'm sure teaches here at Grand Valley, one thing businesses hate is uncertainty. And so, yes, I mean, we're going to slow hiring, we're going to slow CapEx, we're going to slow all spending because we don't know what the environment's going to look like in 90 days. And, we have a fundamental belief that when we hire an employee that we want to, have a contract that they will be an employee if they are in good performance for as long as they want to be an employee. And so we're not going to violate that principle in this environment. And so, yeah, I mean, it's everything is stopped, which I think is, we talked a little bit about reshoring or some of those moves. It is very hard to reshore a business if you don't know what the status is going to be 3 months from now. And so, if you are investing hundreds of millions of dollars in capital to build factories in the US, to have tariffs go away in a few months, boy, that would be a quick exit to the, via the board or the shareholders. And so I don't think you're going to see a lot of movement. I expect CapEx and hiring to dry up over the next few months for any business impacted by tariffs. Please jump in if you guys have.
Oh, no, I agree. I mean, I think a challenge is HR is not usually even in the room for these discussions, but they they're preparing for, we're going to have to be slashing hiring, we're going to have to be looking at, bigger business expenses. Your health, as tariffs on pharmaceuticals roll in, that will lead to increases in healthcare costs, which add to the cost of carrying an employee. So on the flip side, if you have a lot of experience in navigating U.S. Customs, you have very good job security right now. Because every company needs that expertise in-house. But that's a challenge, for a new college grad.
I agree. I think in times of economic uncertainty, just as we do as consumers, we might hold on to our wallet a little tighter. That's what companies do. And some of those companies, for example, we are not growing in our headcount right now. We've frozen, and a lot of the companies that we talk to have as well. But a lot of companies, I mentioned that we bought up a lot of inventory, in January and again before April. So there's a lot of money flowing out. And then we're paying additional money in some cases to inventory that, grabbing additional space in third-party warehouses. So that's a concern for companies. Yeah. And they're probably not going to invest in additional human resources right now.
Over here.
So I know that you're intensely focused on the short term because of long-term instability, but I'm curious, what probability would you sign 1,359 days from now, the next administration either completely reversing or very much narrowing the focus to China?
Yeah, again, I'll give you my personal opinion. I mean, a lot of what the Trump 1.0 tariffs were intended to target, we agreed with, right? So, I think there are some fair trade practices that had become unsustainable in operating with China. And if you go back and read kind of what the intent of the tariffs were in 2018 and 2019, it was around negotiating against fair trade practices in China, and things like IP and ability to freedom to practice in China, those types of things. And so I think that mission is still, no matter the administration, the mission of the United States. And I would expect that to continue to be the mission of the United States. I think the fair trade with what will be the largest economy in the world is an important mission. So I think that stays. What that looks like may differ. It may be tariffs, it may be something else, but we can talk about trade agreements in Southeast Asia and Asia and what role those should play. But I think that focus stays. The idea, I think the debate we can have is around what should American manufacturing and the role of American manufacturing and the next administration. I think you'll get different points of view on that, and so I think those will be shifting sands. I think it's really hard to make a 10 or 15-year investment right now, knowing that 4 years from now there's a presidential election. And that's just the calculus that every boardroom's going to have to do.
So I'll add in that one of the few bipartisan issues, the only bipartisan issue in Congress, is changing our relationship with China. So in 4 years, is that likely to change? It didn't change much from Trump 1 into the Biden administration. Right. Biden kept everything in place. There's fine tuning. And the other challenge with looking 4 years ahead is for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So what the rest of the world is going to think about us in 4 years, and are they going to, even if everything went back to normal, the world has changed its view of America through this process. So our global relationships will always look a little bit different because of this period.
Indeed. Other questions? In the back.
I know the tariffs are uncertain on what's going to happen, in the next 90 days, 120 days, etc. But a lot of companies are already saying, "Hey, we're going to increase our prices by this amount. We're announcing this now that we're probably going to do this." And I think it's pretty rare that I've seen a company drop their prices down, when things are settled, right? Do you think that some companies might, not maliciously now because they're trying to protect their bottom line, but keep their prices high to say, "Hey, well, we took all these hits during tariffs, so now you guys have to pay the price for the next 4, 5, 6 years so we can recoup that money back. What do you think about the status of that in the market?
Prices never come back down. we learned from COVID. It's going to be a constant adjustment to a new normal.
Yeah, I mean, I think the environment you're describing assumes there isn't competition, right? So, I mean, the incentive of the marketplace is to maximize value and in our specific case, grow share. So companies will find the right balance between where they can sell product and create demand and how they can create value for shareholders. Do I think if everyone took pricing now and tariffs went away, everyone would hold their prices higher? Not unless there was an illegal collusion, because someone will have the incentive to lower the price, to grab share and create more value for their company. So I think inflation is here to stay. I mean, look, prices have never gone down in an inflationary environment. I do think in a tax environment, prices have a more high likelihood to move. And I think you will see a lot of people, as we're negotiating contracts, putting surcharge pricing or tariff pricing into their contracts so that it is highly transparent. And it's a line item that you can cross off when tariffs change. I think you'll find partners are going to ask for that. I would be surprised if they don't.
That's been part of the messaging as well. In our communications with customers, we've tried to position it that this is we hope, a temporary phenomenon. And if tariffs are rolled back, then we're willing to have a different conversation. And I think some of our competitors are doing that as well.
And I mean, I'll give you a specific example for us in 2018. I mean, we took pricing around Tariff 1.0, but we also exited China. And as we exited China, we took pricing back down. So I think what you'll find is there will be people who take pricing because they have to and then find other ways and optimize the demand curve of their business. I mean, the person we haven't talked about in all of this is the American consumer, and the consumer will not be able to sustain a 80% price increase from everybody that sells goods to them. And so you're going to have to find an equilibrium somewhere.
Yes.
So we're a lakeshore manufacturer. We're in the midst of a plant expansion. Most of all of our equipment's now stateside, but we still have containers on the water from country of origin of Japan. Is there any recommendations that you would offer up for a scenario like that?
When did you ship it from Japan?
I think like in March.
I would talk to your broker and confirm exactly the date that those were on the water.
That April 2nd is the
9th.
Yes.
I believe it was the 9th for
The
Japan.
reciprocal.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, the dates matter here. There are a lot of goods still on the water that are tariff-free. And so,
And it has to be on the water. A plane does not go on the water intentionally. So CP makes that very clear. It has to be in a vessel, which is a boat.
Yes. Yes. It's all about the details, right? The devil's in the details with this one in particular. I think we have time for one more question over here.
Adam, you mentioned the complications of moving manufacturing back to the United States. Forgetting all the uncertainty, if your company's committed to moving manufacturing back, what are the issues you see to getting that done? Like the top 2 or 3 from each of your seats, like moving things back. As I'm asking, I've read about this a lot more regionally from a Michigan perspective. What makes it hard?
yeah, so, I mean, you're going against the tide of 25 years of globalization. So if you think about an industry like ours, we make 15 million vacuum cleaners a year or some, Kimberly probably knows the exact number, whatever it is. There is no small motor manufacturing left in the United States to supply that type of volume. And so we could build a plant here. We could buy molding machines. You're talking about buying 1,500 to 2,000 molding machines, to put in a facility, which you're probably not going to find a supplier for here in the United States. You're talking about trying to reshore a component supply chain. You know, if you think about electronic or for those who are familiar with the term, you know, PCBA boards, small electronic, all of the global supply sits in China. And so we can build a factory to assemble vacuum cleaners. That is very, very viable. We cannot supply all of the things you need to build a vacuum cleaner in the United States. And so that is the first hurdle. The second hurdle is, you know, I think there's a jobs report today. Someone probably updated it on their phone already. I mean, there's not a lot of available labor floating around in the United States. And so, you know, at a 3 to 4% unemployment, getting valuable or viable labor is the other factor. I mean, you need to train, we're talking about scale here that is enormous. Otherwise, if you automate the factory, what is the point? And so I think those are the tension points that as we evaluate, and we certainly, believe me, we are certainly evaluating, does it make sense to onshore production again? I mean, you have to. If you are not evaluating that, you have to put that in your playbook to understand the economics. But just very practically, those are the economics that we're up against.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Pam.
So I have to put in an editorial comment here because part of my PhD is in international business, and it was decades ago. But decades ago, the economic models and the trade models predicted this happening. When we took a lot of our manufacturing offshore, we would lose that know-how and not be able to bring it back on without a lot of effort and money. And that's where we are. And listening to the group, as well as when I was talking to people earlier, one thing that kept coming up is we need to learn how to disrupt ourselves, and we need to look beyond the straight and narrow that we've always done. And we need to look at the what ifs and think about those on a regular basis and not just think about quarter by quarter by quarter, but what will our business look like in 5 to 10 years? And what will some of those external factors be and internal factors that will impact what we do? And I think Adam, Angela, and Brian were spot on in everything that they said. And Sonia, thank you so much for creating the questions because they were perfect. So please, let's give them all another hand. So in recognition of you coming and doing this, we didn't want to give you bling that would go into a landfill. So instead, we have a gift in your name that's been given to 33 buckets in their 2025 Clean Water Initiative in Cusco region of Peru. So thank you very much for your time, your expertise, and your willingness to be pretty candid in what you talked about. Thank you all for being here. We will be back sometime in the fall with another Secchia breakfast. Have a great day.